Its sense of importance seems to me quite wrong. Now, when the Roman Empire was falling, the fathers of the Church didn't bother much with the fall of the Roman Empire. What they bothered with was how to preserve virginity. That was what they thought important. Well, now...
What did they do about that, sir?
Well, they exhorted people and didn't bother about seeing that the armies held the frontiers or anything like that, or that the taxation system was reformed. They were occupied in founding monasteries and nunneries and so forth, and thought that far more important than preserving the empire. Well, so in the present day, when the human race is falling, I find that eminent divines think that it's much more important to prevent artificial insemination than it is to prevent the kind of world war that will exterminate the whole lot of us. And that seems to me to show a lack of sense of proportion.
Yes, wouldn't you agree, though, that many organized religions have done a tremendous amount of good in spreading education where perhaps no other system has been available, as in Burma, say, where the monks have done a tremendous amount of educating the poor, where there aren't any organized schools?
Well, I think it's possible, yes, and I think the Benedictines did a certain amount of good in that way, but only after doing the harm. They first did a great deal of harm, and then a little good.
But then what about people, though, who feel that they must have some faith in a religion, otherwise they can't face their life at all?
Well,
you take that away?
I say people who feel that are really... they're showing a kind of cowardice which in any other sphere would be considered contemptible, but when it's in the religious sphere it's thought admirable. And I can't admire cowardice, whatever sphere it's in. Now, take the whole question of the very dangerous condition that the world is in. I get letters constantly from people saying, oh, God will look after it. But he never has in the past. I don't know why they should think he will in the future.
You think this is a very unwise doctrine to follow. It ought to be self-help rather than depending on somebody else to do it for you.
Certainly, yes.
But then if, though, a religion is harmful, and yet man has always insisted on having one, what is the answer?
Oh, man hasn't. Some men have, and those are the men who are used to it. In countries in the land, for instance, people walk on stilts, and they don't like walking without stilts. And religion is just the same thing. Some countries have got accustomed to it. But now, I spent a year in China, and I found that the ordinary, average Chinese had no religion whatsoever, and they were just as happy, I think, given their bad circumstances, happier than most Christians would have been.
But I think a Christian would say that if he could convert them into being Christians, they'd be much happier.
Well, I don't think that's borne out by the evidence at all.
Yes, but doesn't man rather search for some cause or faith outside himself, which appears to be bigger than himself, not merely a question of cowardice or leaning on it, but also wanting to do something for it?
Well, but there are plenty of things bigger than oneself. I mean, you start, first of all, there's your family, then there's your nation, then there's mankind in general. And those are all bigger than oneself and are quite sufficient to occupy any genuine feelings of benevolence that a man may have.
Do you think that organized religion is going to go on having the same grip on mankind?
I think it depends entirely upon whether people solve their social problems or not. I think that if there go on being great wars and great oppressions and many people leading very unhappy lives, probably religion will go on, because I've observed that the belief in the goodness of God is inversely proportional to the evidence. When there's no evidence for it at all, people believe it, and when things are going well and you might believe it, they don't. So I think that if people solve their social problems, religion will die out. But on the other hand, if they don't, I don't think it will. Now you can get illustrations of that in the past. In the 18th century, when things were quiet, a great many educated people were free thinkers. Well, then came the French Revolution, and certainly English aristocrats came to the conclusion that free thought led to the guillotine, and so they dropped it, and they all became deeply religious, and you got Victorianism. And the same thing again happened with the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution terrified people, and they thought that unless they believed in God, their property would be confiscated. So they believed in him. So that I think you'll find that these social upheavals are very good for religion.
But do you think that you and I are going to be just snuffed out completely when we die?
Certainly, yes. I don't see why. I know that the body disintegrates, and I think that there's no reason whatever to suppose that the mind goes on when the body is disintegrated.
Well, Russell, what do you mean by taboo morality?
Well, I mean the sort of morality that consists in giving a set of rules, mainly as to things you must not do, without giving any reasons for those rules. And sometimes no reasons could be found, other times they could. But in any case, the rules are considered absolute. These things you must not do.
What sort of things?
Well, now, it depends on the level of civilization. Taboo morality is the primitive kind. It is the only kind, I think, in primitive tribes, where, for example, it would be a rule, you must not eat out of one of the chief's dishes. If you do, you will probably die, so they say. And there are all sorts of rules of that sort. I remember the king of Dahomey had a rule that he must not look long in any one direction, because if he did, there would be tempests in that part of his dominions. And so there was a rule. You must always be looking round.
But those are sort of taboos from what we would, I suppose, consider primitive societies. What about our own?
Well, our own morality is just as full of taboos. There are lots of things, even in the most august things. Now, there is one sin, definitely recognized to be a sin, which I have never committed. It says, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's ox. Now, I never have, but I don't quite see what harm I should do if I did.
Yes, but what about more sort of matter-of-fact or everyday rules than that? Are there examples of taboo morality?
Oh, yes, and of course a great deal of taboo morality is entirely compatible with what one might call rational morality. For instance, that you shouldn't steal or you shouldn't murder. Those are precepts that are entirely in accord with reason, but they are set forth as taboos, and when they're set forth as taboos, they have consequences that they ought not to have. For instance, in the case of murder, it's considered that it forbids euthanasia, which I think a rational person would be in favor of.
But do you put in the category of taboo morality things like Hindus saying you shouldn't eat beef? And Jews
yes,
saying
those are typical things of Hindu morality. The Hindu says you shouldn't eat beef. The Mohammedan and the Jew says you mustn't eat pork. And there's no reason for that. It's just a taboo.
But you don't think these taboos serve any useful purpose?
Some do and some don't. It all depends. I mean, if you get a rational basis for your ethic, you can then look into the taboos and see which are useful. But the prohibition of beef, I should say, it doesn't do any good at all. It only means that a large number of cattle have to die very painful deaths.
Now, if you don't believe in religion, and you don't, and if you don't, on the whole, think much of the assorted rules thrown up by taboo morality, do you believe in any system of ethics?